The mysterious message. It was an ordinary day for Jack Carter, a simple man who lived a quiet life in a small town. Jack was a mechanic, working long hours in his garage, fixing cars and keeping to himself. He had no interest in adventure or excitement. His life was routine and predictable. But little did he know that today would change everything. It all started with a strange noise. Jack was wiping his hands on a rag, preparing to call it a day, when his old computer screen flickered. At first, he thought it was a glitch. But then, the screen went black, and a new message appeared, glowing bright against the dark background. Jack blinked in confusion. The message was unlike anything he had ever seen before. The text on the screen read, "Help us, Earthling. You are our last hope. The fate of my world lies in your hands. Please, we need you." Jack sat back in his chair stunned. His first thought was that it was some kind of joke, maybe a prank from one of his friends. But as he stared at the screen, he noticed something odd. The message wasn't just a text. It seemed to pulse with energy, like it was alive. The words shimmered and shifted, almost as if they were trying to communicate in a way that words alone couldn't. He reached forward and touched the keyboard, trying to type a response, but nothing happened. Then, just as quickly as the message had appeared, it disappeared. The screen flickered again, showing a series of strange symbols, followed by another message. "I am Princess Zara of the Extinction Empire. My people are dying. We have no time. Please, you must help us." Jack's heart raced. What was happening? He had no idea who this Princess Zara was, or what extinction was. Was this some kind of elaborate science fiction game? Or was it something more? His mind raced with questions. He rubbed his eyes, convinced that he was just tired, or maybe the stress of work was getting to him. But then the screen changed again, this time showing an image. Jack's jaw dropped. On the screen, a woman appeared, tall, regal, with glowing skin that shimmered like the stars. Her eyes were a bright blue, almost glowing with urgency. She spoke, her voice coming through the speakers loud and clear. "Human, I do not have much time. My world is dying. Our resources are depleted, and our technology is failing. My people are starving, and we are being hunted by a force we cannot defeat. I have come to you because you are the last hope for my people. You are the only one who can help us." Jack froze, staring at the screen. Was this a dream? Or had he somehow lost his mind? He shook his head, trying to clear the fog in his thoughts. But no matter how much he tried to dismiss it, the reality of the situation sank in. "Why me?" Jack asked aloud, his voice trembling. "Why would you choose me?" The princess's image flickered, and her face grew more serious. She seemed to understand his confusion. "You are not like the others," she said softly, her voice full of a strange kind of sadness. "You are ordinary, yet you have the potential to do extraordinary things. We need someone who can think beyond the limits of our world, someone who is willing to make difficult choices. You are the one we need." Jack's mind raced. This couldn't be real. He was just a mechanic. What could he possibly do to save an entire alien civilization? What did this princess expect from him? "How do you know about me?" Jack asked, his voice growing more desperate. "I'm nobody. I don't even know where to start." The princess paused, her expression softening. The image on the screen grew clearer, showing her entire form, beautiful, but also filled with a deep sorrow. "You do not need to understand now," she replied. "You will learn soon enough. But time is running out. You are our last hope. If you refuse, it will be the end for us. The darkness will consume us all." Jack felt a cold chill run down his spine. This wasn't a joke. This was real. He glanced around the room, half expecting someone to jump out and laugh at him, telling him this was all just a prank. But there was nothing. Just silence. The princess's face grew more serious. "I will send you coordinates," she said. "You must go there. The fate of my people depends on it. Please hurry." Jack looked at the screen, his hands shaking. He wasn't sure if he should believe this, if he should trust the words of an unknown alien. But something in her voice, in her eyes, made him pause. It felt like a cry for help, a cry he couldn't ignore. Just as quickly as she appeared, the image vanished. The screen went back to its normal, flickering state. Jack sat there for a long moment, trying to process everything. His heart pounded in his chest. The logical part of his brain screamed that it was all nonsense, that he should just forget about it and go back to his normal life. But the other part of him, the part that believed in something greater, couldn't shake the feeling that this was real. He was being called to something bigger than himself. He was being asked to make a choice, one that would change everything. Jack stared at the screen, the coordinates glowing softly. Without thinking, he stood up, his mind made up. He didn't know what awaited him or how he could help an alien princess, but one thing was clear: his life was about to change forever. And he had no choice but to follow the call. The princess's story. As Jack's heart pounded in his chest, he couldn't help but wonder if he was making a terrible mistake. The decision to follow the mysterious coordinates wasn't one he made lightly, but the voice of Princess Zura echoed in his mind. Her plea for help was unlike anything he had ever heard before. This wasn't some prank or an elaborate hoax. This was real, and it was urgent. He packed his bag quickly, grabbing anything he thought he might need for a journey into the unknown. A flashlight, a few tools, some water, and a couple of days' worth of food. He had no idea what lay ahead, but something told him that whatever was coming would demand more than just the basics. Still, he had no time to waste. Every second counted, or so the princess had said. The coordinates led him to a remote location, far away from the quiet life he had once known. The site was hidden in the woods, a place few people ever ventured to. As Jack reached the spot, the ground began to hum beneath his feet, like a low, vibrating energy that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He looked around, confused. There was nothing here, just trees, dirt, and an unsettling silence. But as his eyes scanned the surroundings, he saw something strange. A beam of light, faint at first, began to shine from the ground. It grew brighter, until a large circle of light appeared, illuminating a small, hidden structure beneath the earth. Jack's mind raced. He had no idea how the princess had known where to find him, but the sight before him couldn't be a coincidence. Without hesitation, Jack stepped into the light, his breath catching in his throat as he descended into the structure. It wasn't just any underground bunker or secret base. This was something far more advanced. The walls glowed with an eerie blue light, and strange symbols covered the surface. They weren't like anything Jack had ever seen before, and he felt a deep sense of awe, mixed with fear. He realized this wasn't just a mission to save some distant alien race. It was something much bigger. As he walked deeper into the structure, the air around him grew cooler. The walls shifted, and suddenly, Jack found himself in a room unlike anything on Earth. The technology here was beyond comprehension. Floating screens blinked with information Jack couldn't even begin to understand. A sleek, metal chair sat at the center of the room, and the moment Jack stepped closer, it activated. A holographic image of Princess Zura materialized before him, her face serious yet full of hope. "Thank you for coming, Earthling," she said, her voice soft yet full of urgency. "I know you must have many questions, but we have little time. I will explain everything." Jack sat down, trying to take it all in. The princess's hologram flickered slightly, adjusting to the dim light in the room. She appeared more fragile than she had on the screen, her features tired, as though the weight of her entire world rested on her shoulders. "My name is Zyra, and I am the last of the Selection royal family," she began, her voice heavy with sorrow. "Our planet, Xalix, was once a thriving world, a peaceful empire where all species lived in harmony. We were advanced in ways that you cannot yet imagine, and we had everything we needed to prosper. But that was before." She paused, her eyes looking down as if remembering something painful. Before the darkness came, Jack leaned forward, sensing the gravity of her words. "What do you mean, the darkness?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zira's eyes flickered with pain, and she took a deep breath before continuing. "The darkness is an ancient force that once lay dormant, hidden in the depths of our universe. It's not a physical entity, but rather a malevolent energy that feeds on life itself. It is pure destruction, relentless and all-consuming, and it has awoken. My people, our civilization, we are being hunted, one by one." Jack's mind spun with questions, but he didn't interrupt. Zira's story was unfolding like a nightmare, but it didn't feel like a dream. Everything she said was too real, too urgent. "We tried to fight it. We used all the technology we had, all the weapons we could muster, but we failed. The darkness is too powerful for us to stop alone. My father, the king, died trying to protect our people. And now I am the last one left. My people are dying, and we have no more time." Zira's voice cracked slightly, and Jack could see the weight of grief in her eyes. She had lost everything. Her family, her kingdom, her people. She had no choice but to fight for survival, even if it meant asking for help from a stranger, a human she knew nothing about. "I have come to you, Jack Carter," she continued, her gaze locking with his, "because you are the only one who can help us. You are different from anyone I've encountered. The darkness can't touch you the way it touches us. Your species, you are resilient. You are capable of making sacrifices in ways we cannot even comprehend. We need someone like you to find the source of the darkness and destroy it." Jack shook his head, still trying to grasp what was happening. "But I'm just a mechanic. I fix cars. I don't know anything about saving worlds or fighting ancient forces. I can't do this." Zira's holographic image softened, and for a moment, Jack could see the desperation in her eyes. "You don't need to know everything. You have the strength inside you, Jack. You are more than you realize. And I will help you, guide you every step of the way. Together, we can end this. You are our last hope." Jack sat back in his chair, the weight of her words pressing down on him. Could he really do this? Could he really save an entire alien civilization from an unstoppable force? He wasn't sure, but the look in her eyes, the hope that still burned within her, made him believe he had no choice but to try. As the hologram of Zira flickered, she sent him the first set of coordinates, a place where he could find the first clue, the first step toward stopping the darkness. The journey ahead would be dangerous, and Jack had no idea what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain: his life would never be the same. And as the princess's image faded from view, Jack made his decision. He stood up, ready to face whatever came next. The fate of an entire world rested on his shoulders, and somehow he was ready to take that first step, the first test. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped out of the glowing structure. The air around him felt heavy, as though the very atmosphere was thick with expectation. The coordinates Zira had sent him led to a remote moon, barely charted by the galaxy's navigational systems. It was a place forgotten by time, a place where only the bravest or the most desperate dared to venture. And now it was his destination. He had no choice but to trust her, even if it made no sense. The princess, with her plea for help, had given him a mission far beyond his understanding. He was no hero. He was a mechanic, a simple man, used to working with tools, not saving entire civilizations. But the hope in Zira's eyes haunted him. He couldn't turn back now. He had promised her, he had promised the galaxy, that he would try. The journey to the moon was long, and Jack found himself lost in his thoughts. The ship Zira had sent him was nothing like anything he had ever seen before. Sleek, silent, and almost alive, it hummed softly as it cut through space. The controls were far too complex for him to understand, but Zira had given him a simple interface, showing him the path he needed to follow. He had to admit that the journey, though alien and strange, felt like something out of a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. Hours passed in silence as Jack drifted through the dark void of space, the stars outside the ship flickering like distant fireflies. His mind kept returning to the same question. What was he truly capable of? Could he really defeat the darkness that Zira had spoken of? What could a single human do against an ancient force that had already destroyed her world? The ship broke through the moon's atmosphere, pulling Jack from his thoughts. He glanced out of the window to see a barren landscape unfold below him. The moon was desolate, an empty rock, covered in jagged mountains and swirling dust storms. There was no sign of life, no indication that anyone had ever set foot here. It was the perfect place for a test, he realized, a place where nothing would distract him from the task at hand. He touched down with a soft thud, the landing gear locking into place with a smooth precision. Stepping out of the ship, Jack immediately felt the harsh, cold air of the moon bite into his skin. He pulled his jacket tight and surveyed his surroundings. The ground was rocky and uneven, and the sky was a deep, inky black, swirling with dust. The only sound was the occasional rattle of wind against the moon's surface. Zira had warned him that the first test would not be easy. She had told him that he would face challenges that would test his physical, mental, and emotional limits. But Jack had no idea what she truly meant until he saw the first obstacle. Out of the shadows of a nearby cliff, a large creature emerged, its silhouette dark against the swirling dust storm. It was massive, its body covered in thick, scaly armor that shimmered in the dim light. Its eyes glowed an eerie green, scanning the terrain for any sign of movement. The creature sniffed the air and let out a low growl, the sound echoing through the valley. Jack froze, his heart racing. He had never seen anything like it. Its claws were as long as his arms, and its teeth were jagged and sharp, capable of tearing through steel with ease. He took a step back, instinctively reaching for his blaster, the one weapon Zira had given him. But as his fingers brushed the cold metal, he realized something terrifying. The blaster wasn't working. The power supply was dead, likely drained by the long journey through space. He was alone. No weapons, no plan, just a simple man facing an ancient, deadly creature on a forgotten moon. The panic began to rise in his chest, but Jack fought it down. He remembered Zira's words, "You are more than you realize." His mind raced, trying to find a solution. The creature was closing in, its heavy footsteps shaking the ground beneath him. Jack's eyes darted around, searching for anything he could use to his advantage. A loose rock, a stick, anything. And then, in the distance, he saw it, a narrow cave entrance at the base of the cliff. It wasn't much, but it was his only chance. Without thinking, Jack sprinted toward the cave, the creature's growls growing louder behind him. He didn't look back, focusing all his energy on reaching the safety of the cave. The ground beneath him was uneven, but he pushed forward, feeling the heat of the creature's breath on his heels. He reached the cave just as the creature lunged, its claws slashing the air where he had been only seconds before. Jack dove into the cave, his body skidding across the rough floor as he scrambled to his feet. He turned to face the entrance, panting heavily, his heart hammering in his chest. The creature paused at the entrance, its glowing eyes watching him from the darkness. For a moment, everything was silent. Jack's mind raced, trying to think of a way to fight back. But the creature was too strong. It was closing in, and he was trapped. He could hear it breathing, feel its presence just outside the cave. His mind went blank. This was it. He had failed. But then something clicked. A thought, a memory, something that Zira had said earlier, when she had first sent him on this journey. The darkness does not strike where there is hope. Jack's breath caught in his throat. Hope. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't have a plan. But he had something far more powerful than either of those things. He had his will. He had his hope. The creature lunged again, and Jack, with nothing but his bare hands and a burning desire to survive, fought back. He grabbed a jagged stone from the cave floor, swinging it with all his strength at the creature's glowing eyes. The stone hit with a sickening crack, and the creature recoiled, howling in pain. Jack didn't stop. He kept swinging, driven by the knowledge that if he didn't act now, he would die. The creature stumbled back, disoriented, its glowing eyes fading as it retreated into the shadows. Breathing heavily, Jack dropped to his knees, his body shaking from the adrenaline. He had done it. Against all odds, he had survived. The first test had been passed. He wasn't sure how he had done it, but he knew one thing. He was no longer just a mechanic. He was a man on a mission, and the darkness had not claimed him. Jack stood up slowly, looking out of the cave into the dark landscape ahead. He knew this was just the beginning. The true test had only just begun, but he was ready. He had hope, and that was enough to keep going. As he walked out of the cave, Jack felt something new inside him. Strength, purpose, and the knowledge that he could face whatever came next. He wasn't just fighting for Zira or her people. He was fighting for the survival of everything. And that made all the difference. A betrayal within. Jack's heart was still pounding from a harrowing escape from the creature. The narrow cave had given him only a moment to catch his breath before he had to continue his journey. He wasn't entirely sure what the next step in the mission was, but Zira's instructions had been clear. Survive, and the next piece of the puzzle would reveal itself. The planet had shown him its deadly face. He had passed the first test, but there were many more to come. As he ventured deeper into the desolate landscape, one thing was becoming painfully clear. He was no longer just a pawn in someone else's game. The stakes were real. And now, a new danger was emerging, one that came not from the creatures lurking in the shadows, but from within the very group that had brought him here. The journey took Jack across the surface of the moon, through the dark valleys, and toward a hidden base where Zira's people had once tried to stop the growing darkness. The more Jack traveled, the more his sense of unease grew. There was something wrong. Something wasn't adding up. He wasn't sure if it was the constant feeling of being watched or the way the environment seemed to shift when he wasn't looking, but something in the pit of his stomach told him that he was being led into a trap. The princess's message had been clear. There would be allies to help him along the way. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that not all of them were as trustworthy as they seemed. He had spent days traveling with Zira's crew, a group of aliens who were once loyal to her kingdom. They were an elite force, skilled and resourceful. But as time passed, Jack began to notice subtle signs of discord among them. There were glances exchanged behind his back, whispers in the dead of night. It was impossible to ignore. One of the crew members, a tall Xelixian named Dragon, had been especially cold toward Jack. At first, Jack had dismissed it. Maybe Dragon was just cautious of an outsider. But it wasn't just that. Jack had seen Dragon sneaking around at odd hours, speaking with other members of the crew in hushed tones. There was no proof, no direct evidence of betrayal, but it was hard to ignore the growing tension. The real turning point came one night, as they made camp near a craggy ridge. The wind howled through the desolate landscape, carrying with it an eerie quiet. As Jack sat by the fire, staring into the dancing flames, Dragon approached him, his footsteps almost silent on the rocky ground. "You should be careful, human," Dragon said, his voice low and rough. Jack glanced up at him, puzzled. Careful about what? Dragon's eyes narrowed, his voice turning even colder. "You've been too trusting. Not everyone on this mission is as loyal as you think. People are starting to wonder what you're really doing here." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" Dragon stepped closer, lowering his voice so that only Jack could hear. "You're not the only one who wants to stop the darkness, but some of us have other plans. Zira's intentions are not as pure as you might think." Jack stood up, suddenly on edge. "What are you implying?" Dragon smirked, his expression dark. "I'm saying that the princess might not be the savior she claims to be. And you're just a tool in her plan. Nothing more. She's using you, just like she's used all of us." Before Jack could respond, Dragon turned and walked away, leaving Jack standing in stunned silence. The fire crackled in the distance, but the warmth it provided seemed far away, as if he were standing in the coldest place on earth. Could it be true? Was Zira really hiding something from him? The more he thought about it, the more the pieces started to fall into place. Dragon's words kept echoing in his mind, and the more Jack considered it, the more doubts began to cloud his thoughts. The princess had spoken about saving her people, but what if there was more to her mission? What if her true goal was something far more dangerous, something Jack hadn't yet seen? The feeling of betrayal lingered as he tried to sleep that night. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. He had seen the desperation in Zira's eyes, but was that enough to trust her completely? He had learned to trust his instincts on the job, and right now, those instincts were telling him that the situation wasn't as simple as it appeared. The next morning, as the crew packed up their camp and prepared to continue their journey, Jack decided to investigate. He needed to know if Dragon's warning held any truth. He wasn't sure how to approach Zira, but he couldn't ignore the nagging doubt any longer. As the crew moved out, Jack lagged behind, pretending to check his equipment. When the others weren't looking, he slipped off to the side, moving quietly through the rocky terrain toward the ship they had arrived in. Inside the ship, he found a console with access to the ship's systems. It was risky. He wasn't supposed to have access to this kind of information. But his curiosity got the better of him. He quickly hacked into the database, his fingers moving over the unfamiliar interface. What he uncovered made his blood run cold. There, hidden within the encrypted files, were records of secret communications between Zira and a mysterious figure known only as Commander X. The messages were vague but unmistakable. Zira had been in contact with Commander X long before Jack had ever received her first message, and the messages suggested that the true goal of their mission was not to save her people, but to use the artifact's power to conquer new worlds and expand the Extinction Empire. Jack's hands trembled as he read the files. It was as if the ground had been pulled out from beneath him. Zira wasn't just trying to stop the darkness. She was trying to control it, to harness its power for herself. She was manipulating him, using his strength and hope to fulfill her own desires. Suddenly, he heard footsteps behind him. Jack quickly backed away from the console, but it was too late. A voice, soft but full of authority, spoke from the doorway. "You shouldn't have seen that, Jack." It was Zira. Her hologram flickered in front of him, her expression unreadable. "I was hoping you wouldn't find out this way, but now that you have, we need to talk." Jack stood frozen, the weight of the truth pressing down on him like 100 tons of stone. He had been played. He had been used. But now he had to make a choice. Was he going to walk away from this and let Zira's plans unfold, or would he take a stand and stop her before it was too late? The decision would define not just his future, but the fate of the galaxy itself. The hidden truth. The silence in the ship's control room was deafening as Jack stood face to face with Zira's hologram. Her glowing form was still, but there was something different about the way she looked at him now, an almost cold detachment in her eyes. It was as though she was watching him, waiting for him to process the truth, to come to terms with what he had just uncovered. But for Jack, the truth was like a bomb that had just exploded in his chest. His mind raced. He had trusted her. He had believed in her cause. He had believed that Zira and her people were fighting for survival, for a future. But everything he had learned in the last few minutes made it clear. Zira wasn't trying to save her people. She was manipulating him, using him as a pawn in a dangerous game that would cost more lives than he could imagine. And Jack had unknowingly walked right into her plan. "You've been lying to me." Jack's voice cracked, and he didn't recognize it as his own. His hands were trembling, his body tense with anger and betrayal. "The whole time, you've been using me." Zira didn't flinch, didn't seem surprised. Instead, her image flickered, her features smoothing into something more composed. "It wasn't a lie, Jack," she said softly, her voice calm, almost too calm. "I never said I was here purely to save my people. I told you I needed help, and I do. But you never asked the right questions." Jack clenched his fists, the weight of the betrayal heavy on his shoulders. He took a step closer, anger burning in his chest. "I trusted you. I thought you were different. I thought you wanted to save everyone." Zira's eyes softened, but there was no guilt in her expression. Only the calm, assured demeanor of someone who had made her peace with the choices she had made. "My people are dying, Jack. And you know what? I'm done with waiting. I can't wait for the darkness to destroy everything we've worked for, just because it's too risky to take control. The galaxy is fractured, and someone has to unify it. That someone is me." The words hit Jack like a physical blow. It wasn't just that she was lying. It was that her entire plan was so much bigger than what he had imagined. She wasn't trying to stop the darkness. She wasn't trying to save anyone. Zira was trying to conquer it, to bend it to her will, and use it as a weapon to take over the galaxy. Jack stepped back, shaking his head in disbelief. "You're out of your mind," he muttered. "You're willing to destroy entire civilizations, just to rule them. You're willing to turn this whole galaxy into your empire." Zira's form flickered slightly, and for the first time, Jack saw a glimmer of something: regret, sorrow. Or was it just the coldness of someone who had buried their humanity beneath layers of ambition? "Do you think I want this, Jack?" she asked, her voice suddenly softer, almost vulnerable. "Do you think I want to be the one to take this path? My father died in the battle against the darkness. My mother, my brothers, all gone. They were weak, Jack. They believed in peace, in negotiation. But it doesn't work. The universe doesn't care about peace. It cares about power. And if I don't act now, my people will be wiped out, and the darkness will spread to every corner of this galaxy." Jack could feel his pulse quicken as the reality of her words sank in. She wasn't just some evil conqueror. She believed in what she was doing, convinced that her actions were justified, even if they meant destroying countless innocent lives along the way. In her eyes, it was either her empire or the end of everything. I don't know what to believe anymore," Jack said quietly, his voice faltering. His mind was in turmoil. He had come here to help. He had wanted to save her people, to stop the darkness. But now he was caught in a twisted web of lies and ambition. "You've already betrayed everyone you promised to protect." Zira's hologram tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "You're wrong, Jack. I haven't betrayed anyone. I'm saving them. You'll see that soon enough. The darkness is a weapon, not just a force of destruction. And I'm going to control it. I can reshape the galaxy, make it stronger, more unified than it's ever been." Jack shook his head, his stomach turning. He thought back to everything she had said to him, about saving her people, about the dangers of the darkness. She had played him from the start. The truth stung, but it was clear now. This was no longer about saving the galaxy. This was about Zira's thirst for power. "I can't help you with this," Jack said firmly, his voice finally steady. "I'm not going to be a part of your conquest. You've lost your way, Zira. And I'm done." Zira's image flickered once more, her gaze hardening. "You think you can stop me?" she asked, her voice low and dangerous. "You think you have a choice?" Jack didn't flinch. "I have a choice, and I'm making it." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was thick, heavy with the weight of the choices that had been made. Zira's gaze never left Jack's, her eyes burning with a fierce determination. But Jack didn't back down. He had learned enough. He knew what he had to do. "I'm going to stop you, Zira," he said, his voice unwavering. "And if that means I have to take you down to save this galaxy, then that's what I'll do." Zira's expression twisted into something darker, more calculating. "We'll see about that," she said, before her image vanished completely, leaving Jack alone in the quiet control room. Jack stood there, breathing heavily, As the weight of his decision settled over him, he had been used, betrayed, but now he had a new mission. He wasn't just fighting the darkness anymore. He was fighting Zyra and everything she represented. The truth had been hidden from him, but now it was clear. Zyra's plan was more dangerous than the darkness itself, and if Jack was going to save the galaxy, he would have to stop her first. The journey ahead was darker than he could have imagined, but he would not fail. He couldn't, not when so much was at stake. A last stand. The sound of Jack's boots crunching against the barren surface of the moon echoed in the quiet stillness, as if the very ground was aware of the storm brewing in his chest. He had made his choice. He couldn't let Zyra go down the path she was on. But now, the stakes were higher than ever. The rebellion he was about to lead wasn't just against the darkness. It was against Zyra herself, against the very woman who had once trusted him, who had once seemed to hold the fate of the galaxy in her hands. Now, that fate rested with Jack. The crew had split up after the confrontation in the control room. Some of them remained loyal to Zyra, the ones who still believed in her vision of a unified empire, one built on power, dominance, and control. Others, like Dragan, had started to see the truth in Jack's words. The tension between them was palpable. It was only a matter of time before the inevitable clash would happen. Jack had made his way to the planet's surface alone, using the ship's cloaking technology to remain hidden from Zyra's crew. The battle was about to begin, and Jack knew that there could be no turning back. The base he had come to was where everything would end. It was here that Zyra intended to harness the power of the darkness. A colossal artifact, a swirling orb that contained the essence of the void, lay in the heart of the facility, ready to be activated. Zyra had one goal in mind: to use that power to control the entire galaxy. But Jack wasn't about to let that happen. As he approached the base, he could feel the presence of the darkness in the air. The atmosphere felt charged, as if the very fabric of reality was bending to the will of the dark energy that Zyra intended to unleash. The ground beneath his feet vibrated with unnatural force, and he knew that time was running out. The artifact had to be destroyed before Zyra could claim it as her own. He crept closer, moving silently in the shadows. The base was heavily guarded, but Jack was no longer just a mechanic. He had learned to survive, to fight, and to think strategically. He had been pushed to the edge, and now his instincts were sharp, his mind clear. Every move, every decision was calculated. He had no room for mistakes. A low growl suddenly cut through the silence, and Jack froze, his eyes darting toward the sound. Two guards, humanoid creatures with darkened armor, were patrolling the perimeter of the base. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He needed to get past them, but without alerting the entire base to his presence. He scanned the surroundings. The shadows offered little cover, but the side of the base was lined with metal crates. Jack darted toward them, moving swiftly and silently, blending into the darkness. As he crouched behind the crates, he waited, his breath steadying. The guards passed within inches of his hiding place. He held his breath, every muscle in his body tensed, until they moved out of sight. Jack exhaled, his mind racing. He had to move fast. He couldn't afford to waste any more time. The artifact was too close, and Zyra would stop at nothing to claim it. If he didn't act now, all would be lost. He continued his journey through the darkened corridors of the base, each step taking him closer to his goal. He knew that Zyra would be inside, overseeing the activation of the artifact. The final confrontation between them was inevitable, but Jack wasn't sure if he was ready. How could he possibly stop her? She had the power of the darkness on her side. As he reached the central chamber, the sound of voices echoed down the hall. Jack pressed his back against the wall, listening closely. He could hear Zyra's voice, clear and commanding. "Activate the artifact," she ordered. "It is time to take control of the galaxy." Jack's heart clenched. The moment had come. He moved quickly, darting into the chamber. The sight before him took his breath away. The artifact stood in the center of the room, a swirling orb of darkness that seemed to pulse with an eerie, malevolent energy. The room was lined with advanced technology, machines that hummed and buzzed as they prepared to channel the artifact's power. Zira stood in front of it, her back turned to Jack. She was alone. For a split second, Jack hesitated. There was a part of him that still wanted to believe she could be saved. But the truth was undeniable now. Zira wasn't the savior of the galaxy. She was the conqueror, and her vision of the future was one of destruction. Zira. Jack's voice rang out across the chamber, startling her. Zira turned slowly, her face hardening as she saw him standing there. "I knew you'd come," she said, her voice cold, calculating. "Did you think you could stop me, Jack?" Jack stepped forward, his resolve firm. "This ends now, Zira. The darkness doesn't belong to you. It will destroy everything you've ever built. I can't let you control it." Zira's lips curled into a smile, one that held no warmth, no empathy. "You don't understand, Jack. I am the darkness. And if you think you can stop me, you're gravely mistaken." Before Jack could react, Zira raised her hand, and the air around them seemed to shift. The ground trembled beneath their feet as dark tendrils of energy surged from the artifact, wrapping around the room like the claws of some unseen beast. The power of the darkness roared to life, filling the space with a sense of impending doom. Jack's instincts kicked in. He reached for the blaster at his side, but Zira was already moving, her form a blur as she charged at him. Their bodies collided with a violent force, and Jack was thrown to the ground, the breath knocked from his lungs. "You are nothing, Jack," Zira hissed, her voice filled with venom. "A mere pawn in a game you don't understand." Jack's vision swam as he struggled to push her off. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think clearly. The darkness pressed in around him, suffocating him with its power. But in the chaos, something inside him snapped. He couldn't let her win. Not like this. He wasn't just fighting for his life anymore. He was fighting for the future of the galaxy. With a final surge of strength, Jack pushed Zira off and scrambled to his feet. The artifact loomed behind her, its dark energy threatening to consume everything. But Jack could see the truth in her eyes now. She wasn't invincible. She was driven by her own fear, her own desperation. And that weakness was his opportunity. He lunged forward, his hand reaching for the control panel that would deactivate the artifact. The moment his fingers made contact, a surge of energy coursed through him, pure, raw power that burned through his body. The artifact began to pulse, its energy growing unstable. "No," Zira screamed, her voice filled with rage. But it was too late. The artifact erupted in a flash of blinding light, and the room was filled with an earth-shattering roar. When the light faded, everything was silent. The artifact had been destroyed. The darkness was gone. Jack collapsed to his knees, exhausted, bloodied, but victorious. Zira lay unconscious on the floor, her plans undone. The galaxy had been saved, not by a ruler or an empire, but by a single person who refused to give in to darkness. But as Jack looked around the destroyed chamber, he knew the battle wasn't truly over. The galaxy would rebuild, but the cost of that peace would be felt for years to come. And Jack, he had become something he never thought possible, a symbol of hope in a universe that had nearly been consumed by the shadows. He stood, blood dripping from his hands, and walked out of the ruins, leaving Zira behind. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. He was ready to face whatever came next. The last stand had been fought, and the galaxy would rise again. A new beginning. The dust had settled, and with it, the weight of Jack's decisions began to settle into his bones. As he stood amidst the ruins of the destroyed facility, the aftermath of his final confrontation with Zira hung in the air like an unspoken truth. The artifact, the source of the darkness, was gone. The terrible power that had nearly consumed the galaxy was now nothing more than a pile of shattered fragments. But the battle had cost Jack more than he had anticipated. His body was bruised and battered, the result of the struggle that had torn through the base. He had won, but at what cost? For a long moment, Jack stood there, taking in the desolation around him. The silence was almost deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos of the battle that had just unfolded. There were no cheers, no victorious shouts, just the soft hum of the broken machinery and the distant howling of the winds outside. The world felt still, like the calm after a storm. He had done what he set out to do. He had stopped Zyra from using the darkness, saving countless lives in the process. Yet, in the silence, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Something that, no matter how much he had fought, he couldn't undo. Zyra lay unconscious at his feet, her once proud figure now diminished and broken. She had come to this point through ambition and desperation, believing she was saving her people by seizing control of the universe. But the truth was far more complex than she had ever realized. Her people, her empire, had been torn apart by war, by the relentless hunger for power, and in her pursuit of control, Zyra had lost everything: her kingdom, her family, and ultimately, herself. Jack couldn't bring himself to feel anger for her. Her pain was evident, and though he had stopped her, there was still a part of him that understood her motivations. She had been driven by fear, by the desire to protect what was left of her people. But the means she had chosen were monstrous, and Jack couldn't allow her to drag the galaxy into darkness for the sake of her own misguided vision. It was then that the reality of his situation hit him. He had saved the galaxy, yes, but at a cost. The journey had changed him in ways he hadn't anticipated. Jack wasn't the same man who had first answered Zyra's call for help. The trials he had faced, the people he had met, the sacrifices he had made, it all weighed heavily on him. He had seen the darkest sides of both the galaxy and himself, and now, standing among the ashes of his victory, he was unsure of what came next. He looked out at the vast expanse of space through the cracked windows of the facility. The galaxy was still out there, vast and unpredictable, a realm of untold possibilities and endless dangers. Zyra's empire was crumbling, and in the wake of her fall, the galaxy would need to rebuild. It would need leaders, people who could guide it toward a new future, one of hope, cooperation, and peace. But Jack wasn't sure if he was the right person for that job. He had never seen himself as a hero or a leader. He was just a mechanic, a simple man who had been thrust into a situation far beyond his understanding. And now, he was left with the weight of the galaxy's future on his shoulders. As he stood there, lost in thought, the faintest sound broke the stillness. It was a voice, a familiar one. Jack. Jack turned to see Dragan standing in the doorway of the chamber. His face was marked with fatigue, but his eyes were filled with a sense of relief. He had been one of the few to turn against Zyra when the truth became clear, and though Jack didn't fully trust him, he knew that Dragan's loyalty had never wavered in the face of danger. "Is it over?" Dragan asked, his voice low but steady. Jack nodded. "It's over." Dragan took a few cautious steps into the room, his gaze shifting to the wreckage of the artifact. "You did it. You saved us all." Jack didn't respond immediately. He didn't feel like a savior. He felt like someone who had survived a nightmare, only to wake up to a world that was still broken. "I didn't save anyone. I just stopped something worse from happening." Dragan's eyes softened. "Sometimes, stopping the worst is enough. You've given us all a chance to rebuild. That's more than most can say." Jack sighed, rubbing his eyes. The exhaustion weighed heavily on him. "I didn't do it alone. There were others, some who fought for the right reasons, even when they were outnumbered. We'll need them in the coming days. We'll need everyone if we're going to rebuild." Dragan nodded in agreement. "We will, but that's for the future. For now, we've won." Jack stood in the silence for a moment longer, taking it all in. It was strange, feeling this hollow after everything that had happened, but he knew it was necessary. There was too much pain in the galaxy, too much suffering, for any one person to feel truly at peace, And yet, in the back of his mind, Jack knew that the galaxy needed him, needed people like him, who had seen the worst, and still chose to fight for something better. "I'm not going to stay here," Jack said suddenly, turning toward Dragon. "I don't belong here. This isn't my place. The galaxy, it needs more than just one leader. It needs many." Dragon raised an eyebrow. "You're leaving?" Jack nodded. "I've got nothing left here. I've seen too much to just go back to a normal life. There's more out there, more people to help, more fights to fight. I don't know what I'm looking for, but I can't stay in one place." Dragon studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Then go. But remember, you're not alone anymore. We'll need you, if not as a leader, then as a reminder that even ordinary people can make a difference." Jack smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe, but for now, I've got to find my own way." With that, Jack turned away from the wreckage of the base, stepping into the quiet expanse beyond. The galaxy stretched out before him, a canvas untouched and waiting to be filled with new stories, new struggles, and new victories. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew that his journey wasn't over. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Jack felt the smallest flicker of hope. The galaxy had survived its darkest hour, and maybe, just maybe, he could help lead it towards something better. As he walked away, leaving the ruins behind, Jack looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the reaches of his understanding, there were people who needed him, and he was ready to answer that call. The future was unwritten, but Jack knew one thing for sure. Whatever came next, he wouldn't face it alone. The galaxy would rise again, and so would he.